Arthur Labinjo Hughes jailed for life. The little boy was murdered after suffering a campaign of torture and starvation. Tonight, both Emma Tustin and his father Thomas Hughes are behind bars as the Prime Minister shared his shock.
We will leave absolutely no stone unturned to find out exactly what went wrong in that appalling case.
Well, rarely has a case prompted such revulsion and sorrow. As an inquiry gets underway into who failed Arthur, we'll get the latest from Ben, who's been following the story. Also tonight, a national shame which risked death and injury, a scathing review of the disorder at the Euro 2020 final.
We were seconds away from a Hillsborough-type disaster in terms of potential fatalities and life-changing injuries.
75 new cases of Omicron have been found in England as the need for boosters becomes even clearer. A week since Storm Arwen, thousands still without power and right out of patience.
I mean, imagine if this was to happen in London, there'd be absolute uproar. Like, it would be sorted within a second, wouldn't it? Let's be honest.
And they drove us mad in the 80s. Nearly 50 years on, how thousands are squaring up for the Rubik Cube World Cup.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. In a final act of contempt for the defenceless little boy she tormented and murdered, the stepmother of Arthur Labinjo Hughes refused to come into the dock to face sentencing today. Emma Tustin was jailed for life with a minimum of 29 years for subjecting her 6-year-old stepson to a calculated and finally murderous campaign of cruelty. Arthur's father, Thomas Hughes, who was convicted of manslaughter, got 21 years. In a victim impact statement, Arthur's grandmother said he had been failed by the very authorities meant to protect him. Boris Johnson said everything would be done to find out exactly what went wrong. The judge called the case one of the most distressing and disturbing he had ever dealt with, and you may find our report upsetting.
If they had never met, a thriving little boy would be alive today. The words of Arthur Labinjo Hughes' grandmother, as a judge jailed what he called a pitiless father and his calculating girlfriend. He said Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes had relished making Arthur suffer.
He's banged himself off the radiator, he's hit me, he's kicked me.
Repeatedly lying about the campaign of torture and violence they inflicted on this once contented 6-year-old boy. Jailing Tustin for at least 29 years, the judge said she was a manipulative woman who would tell any lie and shift the blame onto anyone to save her own skin. Sentencing Thomas Hughes to 21 years, he said, "You were Arthur's father, in a position of trust, and bore the prime responsibility for protecting him."
Tustin didn't even come into court to hear her sentence. The judge said the pair of them had subjected Arthur to unimaginable suffering, behaviour that was often spiteful and at times sadistic.
Videos shown to the jury were of a frail, thin child who could barely stand after being beaten, starved and poisoned with salt in the last 3 months of his life. In a victim impact statement to the court, his paternal grandmother Joanne Hughes today claimed he was failed by the authorities after she'd sent social workers a photograph showing bruises on Arthur's back 2 months before he died. Tonight, the Prime Minister said he's glad justice has been done, but that tough sentences are no consolation.
What we've got to make sure now is that we learn the lessons about that case. We look at exactly what happened, what else could have been done to protect that child. And it is early days, but I can tell you this. We will leave absolutely no stone unturned to find out exactly what went wrong in that appalling case.
But this senior Conservative MP is concerned the wider system is still letting children down.
We've got social workers who are severely stretched, feeling rather burnt out, and we have the pandemic coming along, making their job that much harder as well. There's a combination of reasons behind this case, but too often it's the same old reasons reheated, and we've really got to tackle that.
In her statement to the court, Arthur's mother revealed his body still lies in a mortuary because the families involved can't agree on his burial. Another distressing detail in the relentless tragedy of this poor little boy.
And Ben joins us now. As you say, Ben, so many distressing details in this case. So today, long prison sentences. But in terms of the authorities, there is much that needs to be understood still about how all this happened to little Arthur, isn't there?
Yes, and it's not hard to understand why Arthur's paternal grandmother would feel so strongly that the authorities let him down. This, after all, is a woman who was prepared to report her own son to social services. And the independent review that's underway into Arthur's death will also have to consider another claim made here during the trial by Emma Tustin's stepfather, that he too made an anonymous call to social services. Now, only tonight, more than 24 hours after the guilty verdicts, we finally heard from the leader of Solihull Council. In a statement, Ian Courts said he is shocked and appalled by Arthur's death. And he said, "I'm very clear that we will leave no stone unturned to understand, learn and fix any issues that the independent review finds." No stone unturned is the same phrase the Prime Minister used tonight. Now, we don't know how long that independent review will take. Experience tells me it could take many, many months. And ultimately, of course, there are only two people who are responsible for Arthur's death. They are Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes. They are both beginning long prison sentences tonight, but in many ways, this is only the very beginning of finding out the full details of what went so terribly wrong.
OK, Ben, thank you very much indeed. Now, anyone who witnessed them, or worse, was innocently caught up in them, is unlikely to forget the frightening scenes of thousands of drunken, ticketless fans storming Wembley Stadium during this summer's Euros Cup final. In her report published today, Baroness Casey of Blackstock says deaths could easily have resulted from what she describes as a day of national shame. Indeed, she told us herself that the chaos was just seconds away from becoming another Hillsborough.
Fuelled by alcohol and drugs, a violent and ticketless mob numbering 2,000 tailgated, stormed disabled gates or fire exits and broke into the stadium. Baroness Casey described it as a perfect storm. Wembley only three-quarters full, COVID restrictions relaxed, no fan zones nearby, and England in their first major final in 55 years. And shockingly, she is convinced we came very close to a national tragedy.
I was horrified. I mean, the scenes of disorder were horrific. The fan behaviour was terrifying, not terrible. It was on a different level and a different league to what I thought from the original coverage. We were seconds away from a Hillsborough-type disaster in terms of potential fatalities and life-changing injuries.
Among the many key findings, the final exposed weaknesses in Wembley's security operation, unprecedented levels of criminal and antisocial behaviour, and a collective failure by the organisers to plan for the worst-case scenario that could have led to serious injuries or even deaths. Scott Furlong took his son Cian to Wembley that day. He was at one of the disabled gates as the thugs tried to break in.
Once we were in the gun cage, the door to the concourse was kicked in, which hit Cian. It's not about being a football fan or anything like that. It's getting what you can for free. It's preying on the weak, if you like. It's not human behaviour. It's a disgrace.
While the report does not single out individuals or organisations for blame, it does point to collective failures, among them the FA and police, who did not recognise this was more than just a football match. It was an event of national significance. And by the time the police arrived in numbers at Wembley, it was too late to move the thousands who'd been there for most of the day. Did you misjudge it on the day?
I don't think that it's about misjudging it on the day. I think what she's saying is that when you plan an event in advance of this size and scale, you've got to treat it differently. Actually, we put in place many things which we've never put in place before. We had our biggest ever team of stewards. We had our biggest ever security presence there.
Among Baroness Casey's recommendations, a new security level for matches of this importance, stronger penalties for football-related disorder, and an FA-led campaign to tackle the worst of supporter behaviours. Some good may yet emerge from England's Day of Shame. Steve Scott, News at 10, Wembley.
The entire coaching staff at Yorkshire County Cricket Club have left in the wake of the racism scandal. They include Martin Moxon, who'd been director of cricket since 2007, and the head coach Andrew Gale. The racism revelations of the former Yorkshire player Azim Rafiq sent shockwaves through the sport. The new chairman, Lord Patel, said he will take whatever action is necessary to regain trust in Yorkshire cricket. Now, even though people are being urged to get their booster jabs as soon as possible, many are having to wait for the paperwork to catch up with the policy. With hopes that the booster will help protect against the new Omicron variant, 75 more cases of which were confirmed in England today, bringing the total in the UK to 134, that third jab could be crucial. But the plan to allow adults to book a booster 3 months rather than 6 after their second jab is unlikely to be fully in place until December the 13th. The speeded-up programme also comes at a cost, with many routine GP health screenings likely to be put back.
It was cold and wet, but people came out to queue all across the country, not waiting in line for the shops, but for something else in high demand this Christmas.
I just turned up because I like to have my booster.
That third COVID vaccination that this woman was eligible for in Haverhill.
The first time we went, we were told we were a week out. So we tried last week and we were told we were 1 day out. So we've come today and thankfully we've had our jab today.
But in Stratford, this man was not. Because the shorter 3-month gap isn't in place yet and he's still too young. Then in Portsmouth, maybe this lady had heard the good news.
Brilliant, well done.
A new study shows the booster provides strong protection against COVID's Beta and Delta variants.
We would hope that a similar protection against hospitalisation and death might be possible against the Omicron variant. But that's speculation, and we can't say that for certain at this point.
The new variant comes on top of rising infection. Overall, there were a further 50,584 COVID cases across the UK today. In England, the rate hit 1 in 60 by the end of last month, according to the ONS. The age group with the biggest proportion of people testing positive was for those of primary school age or younger, at 4.67%. But the over 70s had the lowest rate of infection, at 0.4%. Suggesting the booster programme is working. How well it will work against the new variant is being tested at Glasgow's Centre for Virus Research.
We are basically trying to isolate the Omicron variant.
Where today they were looking into whether Omicron will evade the vaccines.
Hi, Glasgow.
In the same city, new Omicron cases were linked to a Steps concert at a packed venue, with numbers now rising in Scotland, England, and with a first case in Wales in the run-up to Christmas. In South Africa, this looks like it could be a much more transmissible variant, causing worries that it could mean more deaths. That's why the booster programme is being ramped up. But a letter from NHS England today shows how challenging it could be. They want to cut the gap between the second jab and the booster from 6 to 3 months as soon as possible, but say it could take until December the 13th, starting with the over 40s. The military, retired doctors and students will be brought in to help, and GPs will be able to delay routine health checks. Doctors say that is the inevitable trade-off.
But I think what we need to be honest about is the fact that there's a finite capacity within the healthcare system. We can't do everything for everyone, but what we can do is to prioritise the care of our most vulnerable and the ones who've been affected by chronic health conditions.
So another stressful winter for the NHS, with a new COVID variant likely to rise steeply, but hopes that the vaccines will be effective too. Anushka Rastana, News at 10.
Stringent new measures are being introduced in Ireland to try to stop the spread of COVID and, in particular, the Omicron variant there. The rules, announced by the Irish Taoiseach Micheál Martin in a televised address tonight, will take effect from December the 7th and stay in place at least until January the 9th. Private home visits will not be allowed to involve more than 4 households. Nightclubs are to close, and the hospitality sector as a whole will operate under tight restrictions, such as a table service only. Now, they say it's the staff in any establishment who keep its most closely guarded secrets. So there was plenty at stake in the Ghislaine Maxwell sex abuse trial today when Jeffrey Epstein's former housekeeper came under cross-examination. Well, Emma is covering the trial in New York for us. Emma, what has the court heard today?
Well, they were really slugging it out in court through the course of the day. We were told that the defence were going to try and discuss with Mr Alessi, the housekeeper who we heard from yesterday, about his admission that he had taken $6,000 from Jeffrey Epstein's property in the months after he left his employment. Mr Alessi said it was the biggest mistake of his life and something he seriously regretted. But when he was questioned about whether that was the only time it happened, he said it was. The defence kept on trying to say that it happened on another occasion, something that Mr Alessi denied on oath. Now, Mr Alessi was also asked about the times that women had left the property and he'd seen them leaving. He was asked whether or not they ever seemed upset or said anything to him. He said no, they hadn't, but he wished that they had because he would have tried to do something to stop what was going on. He also said that Jeffrey Epstein sometimes took other women back to the property, and when that happened, he would get a phone call saying to remove all photographs of Ghislaine Maxwell.
And Emma, they released the document that you were talking about last night, which really shed some light on the way the couple lived there.
Indeed, and this is the document that we were discussing in court yesterday, and it was basically the housekeeping manual that was issued to staff. It was released by the court to the public for anybody to look at today. It's 58 pages long and sets out how staff were expected to act around Epstein and Maxwell, how they should address the couple, what they were expected to wear, down to the specifics such as the number of pens to be left by the bedside tables. Staff were also instructed to try and anticipate the needs of Mr Epstein, Ms Maxwell and their guests, and they were told they should see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing, except to answer a question directed at them, and to respect Epstein and Maxwell's privacy. When answering the telephone, staff were instructed never to disclose Mr Epstein or Ms Maxwell's activities or whereabouts to anyone. So this is now the end of the first week of this 6-week trial, and we will expect more evidence next week as the defence continue to protest Ghislaine Maxwell's innocence.
OK, Emma, thank you very much indeed for that. The full interview was released today with the Hollywood star Alec Baldwin about the fatal shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins with a prop gun while on set. Last night we showed you some extracts from the interview, but tonight we hear the actor claim that although he was holding the gun, he was not responsible for the shooting. In giving his version of what happened, he says he didn't pull the trigger and he feels no guilt.
He says he doesn't feel guilty. He isn't a victim. And he didn't pull the trigger. But it was a bullet from the gun Alec Baldwin was holding that killed cinematographer Halyna Hutchins.
Do you feel guilt?
No. I feel that there is. I feel that someone is responsible for what happened, and I can't say who that is, but I know it's not me. I mean, I honest to God, if I felt that I was responsible, I might have killed myself if I thought I was responsible. I don't say that lightly.
This was the star's first full public statement about what happened on the set of the movie Rust in October. It was a cross-examination of an actor, carefully setting out his version of events.
I cocked the gun, I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off. I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
At the moment, the decisive
That was the moment the gun went off, yeah. That was the moment the gun went off.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never. That was the training that I had. You don't point a gun at me and pull the trigger at them.
For those watching across America, the hour-long prime-time interview solved little. There is much more to understand, especially for the legal representatives of those directly impacted by the tragedy.
I'm not saying all the fault is on Baldwin, but for him to suggest no fault is on him is absurd. He should have checked that gun. He's the one who held it. He's the one who pointed it. He never should have pointed that gun at a human being. Never, whether someone told him it was cold or not. He bears responsibility.
But the Hollywood star sees it differently.
The notion that there was a live round in that gun did not dawn on me till probably 45 minutes to an hour later.
45 minutes to an hour?
No one could understand. Did she have a heart attack? Because remember, the idea that someone put a live bullet in the gun was not even in reality.
Did you go up to her or did you back away?
I went up to her and then we were immediately told to get out of the building.
His sorrow is evident, but nothing changes the fact that a 42-year-old professional married mother died at work. The court of public opinion still wants to know why a live round was in the gun and who put it there. Questions that may one day be answered, perhaps, in a court of law. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10.
Back here, a week after Storm Arwen wreaked such havoc across northern England and Scotland, nearly 10,000 people are still without power. And while it may be scant consolation to those left literally struggling against the elements, the industry watchdog has launched an urgent review of the Energy's network response to the crisis. The Army's been brought in to help anyone still suffering from the damage caused by the 100-mile-an-hour winds.
There is precious little calm after the storm, but plenty of anger in the aftermath of Arwen's fury.
It's appalling, and you should hold your heads in shame.
In County Durham, villagers confront the county council leader.
Very emotional again today because I'm sick of hearing of the powers that be that are telling people that they are doing things and have done things when they blatantly haven't.
This community centre in St John's Chapel is the sole sanctuary for hot food and a warm welcome. A major incident has now been declared, but women like Gail Davis have been living this emergency for a week.
Can't have a bath, can't have a shower, can't do any washing or drying, ironing, no hot water, because we've got no internet.
And we will try and help you. The local authority insists it's acted as quickly as it can. The Army was called in today.
Just wanted to see how things are with power, fuel, heating.
A doorstep deployment to ensure the old, cold or vulnerable aren't neglected.
But we're OK, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Power companies face a review of their response to the crisis and into the resilience of the network. The industry watchdog has lifted the £700 limit on compensation. Small consolation.
It just hasn't been good enough. I mean, imagine if this was to happen in London. There'd be absolute uproar. Like, it would be sorted within a second, wouldn't it?
In Aberdeenshire, 800 engineers from across the country are now at work. The damage is said to be unprecedented.
We've not known a challenge like this in decades, to be honest. The scale of the damage that the storm has created is, well, from our calculations, at least 5 times worse than the worst storm that we have on record going back to 2005.
More customers will be reconnected over the weekend, but tonight thousands are still out of power and out of patience. John Ray, News at 10.
The Conservatives have today been insisting the result of last night's by-election in Old Bexley and Sidcup was a good result, despite their safe seat majority being slashed. The new MP, Louis French, had a majority of just under 4,500, down from 19,000 in the poll triggered by the death of the former Cabinet Minister James Brokenshire. Labour says Boris Johnson's party should be worried by the outcome, but the Conservatives say they took more than half the vote in a low turnout of 34%. Housing Secretary Michael Gove raised the stakes sharply tonight in the row over a sponsorship deal signed by the Mercedes Formula One team. Mr Gove warned ministers could intervene if Mercedes, Lewis Hamilton's team, pursues its partnership with an insulation firm linked to Grenfell Tower. He said the partnership could undermine the good work done by Mercedes and the sport of motor racing.
Kingspan are on the cutting edge of sustainable buildings.
A new sponsor now featuring on Mercedes team cars in this weekend's Grand Prix, including one driven by Lewis Hamilton. But Kingspan is known for something else too, supplying insulation used in Grenfell Tower, which allegedly fueled the fire that killed 72 people. Nabil Choucair, who lost 6 members of his family, says the sponsorship deal is an insult.
you either respect the families, who, especially the people who were lost, the loved ones, or you don't respect them, you know. And if you respect them, you shouldn't be working with the people that are still under investigation.
Tonight, the Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, wrote to Mercedes boss Toto Wolff, urging him to reconsider and expressing support for the Grenfell families. They are right to feel deeply hurt and aggrieved by your decision to sign this sponsorship deal, he wrote, whilst the public inquiry continues. He said the inquiry were told that Kingspan employees knew their products were more combustible than they were advertising them to be. Last year, a Kingspan manager apologised to the inquiry after an email revealed his response to a question on fire safety. They're getting me confused with someone who gives a damn.
Firstly, I can only apologise for the contents of this email at the time made in 2008.
But today the company was defiant, saying Kingspan played no role in the design of the cladding system on Grenfell Tower, where its K15 product constituted approximately 5% of the insulation and was used as a substitute product without Kingspan's knowledge in a system that was not compliant with the building's regulations. That hasn't gone down well with Olivia Murphy, a Formula One fan who can't sell her Brighton flat, she says, because of Kingspan materials, and wants the deal scrapped.
All the stress and anxiety knowing that I've got a combustible insulation in my wall that is Kingspan, and so to see my favourite team of my favourite sport in a partnership with them, it was just so upsetting.
Mercedes has apologised for what its boss called the additional hurt the announcement has caused, but not for doing the deal in the first place. Libby Vina, News at 10, Westminster.
Some of the biggest stars of British theatre have been paying tribute tonight to the actor Sir Anthony Sher, who's died of cancer at the age of 72.
Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York.
Sir Anthony Sher made his big breakthrough in 1985 as Richard III, of course, for the RSC. Dame Judi Dench called him a sublime actor who performed with incredible intensity. And finally, if you're a child of the 80s, you'll remember a little cube which took the world by storm. Maybe you could do all 6 sides with ease, or maybe you ended up chucking it on the floor in frustration. Well, today, almost 50 years on, the most slick-fingered and sharp-witted gathered in London for what else but the Rubik's World Cup.
Invented in 1974, by the 80s, the Rubik's Cube had taken over the world. Every school child seemed to have one, and competitions to solve the puzzle in the fastest time sprang up everywhere. Now, a new generation of cubers using Bluetooth-enabled Rubiks are competing against players from 32 countries in a virtual World Cup. And boy, are their fingers fast.
I had a cousin come visit us for a Christmas, and she knew how to do it. And that just blew my mind. I thought it was impossible. And I just got curious and learned how to do it myself. And then ever since then, I've just taken off.
Earlier this year, the inventor of the Rubik's Cube, Erno Rubik, sold his empire for £37 million. And the new owners of the brand reckon they can reinvent its appeal.
The 50th anniversary coming up is a big one. We want to celebrate the legacy of the Cube, but innovation is definitely at the core of the DNA of the Cube. We want to continue to innovate. Rubik's is more than just the 3x3 cube. There's actually cubes and products for all levels of abilities.
Despite the new phone apps and the technologies embedded in the latest model, the toy hasn't fundamentally changed since it transfixed its first generation more than 40 years ago.
A Rubik's Cube has 43 billion trillion different combinations, which means each time it's re-scrambled, it gives a cuber a new problem to solve every single time. Very few of us ever got to master the Rubik's Cube, but around here, it never seems to take very long to solve. In fact, it's usually over in a matter of seconds.
The winner of this weekend's tournament can expect to take home at least £20,000. It certainly doesn't look like easy money. Nick Wallace, News at 10.
Could never do it. That's it. Thanks for staying up for us. Have a great weekend from all of us here on the team. Good night.